and welcome to the Mind Your Career webinar series. My name is Rachel Burkhan-Ramelfinger, and I work with the Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled, Leading Yourself and Others Through Change. Today's speaker is Dave Collins, the CEO of Oaks and Reeds. When I asked Dave what he wanted to be when he grew up, he told me that he wanted to play second base for the Red Sox until he was cut from the high school freshman baseball team, and then he wanted to be the general manager of the Red Sox. It's quite an ambitious and creative young man. He still is as an adult, and so it's my pleasure to hand over the controls to Dave.
Thank you, Rachel, and thanks everyone for being here. And now that I'm hearing those early dreams repeated back to me, the trauma of getting cut from that baseball team is kind of flooding back to me. So it's a good way to get started for this webinar. And this webinar is all about change. And I really like that story that you told. And it's a great question to think about with, you know, your career ambitions change, things at work change, what you're trying to do with your life changes all of the time. And the big question I like to lead off any webinar is, and this is going to be an interactive webinar where I'm going to be asking you some feedback questions, some reflection questions for you to answer. You know, if you want to answer them in the chat box, that's great. I'll try to interact with those as much as possible. But more so, these big questions are just for you to reflect on some of the topics because, you know, you're out there online. I'm not able to see you, but I really want you to engage with some of these comments and some of these questions. So I want to know from you, what's the most successful change you've undertaken in your job or your career, and why was it so successful? And I want you to kind of think about this because as I'm going through this webinar, I'm going to be giving you some tools, techniques, some ways of approaching change in your career. And I want you to think about some of these things as they relate to your specific scenario. And think about starting with what has worked well for you. What are some of the tools that are already working for you? Because that's a big point of focus that I want to start with. Not all of these tools will be useful. Some of them won't work for you. Some of them will work for you. So evaluating them through your own perspective is going to be really helpful. So let's get started. Welcome. Today, I'm going to be teaching you some tools from the world of improvisation that you can use to manage change in your own career. And I use this term change management. It's kind of a wonky term. A lot goes under it, but essentially all it means in the corporate context is how do you deal with uncertainty? And that's why improvisation is such a great tool for dealing with change, because improvisation, I'm going to get into a little bit more about the tools of improvisation. Improvisation is an art form that is entirely dealing with uncertainty. There is no script. There's no plan, but there's a set of tools and techniques that help performers deal with uncertainty. We're going to extract those tools from the world of the arts and put them into the world of the working world, and we're going to see how well we can come out of this with some new tools and techniques. So a little bit of background about myself. I'm a terrible baseball player. You already know that. I've kind of moved past that in my career. I'm now more of a baseball watcher, but I do a lot of different things. I've been performing and coaching improv for the last 11 years, both on stage and with teams, and now in a corporate context. I also do podcasts, and mostly what I do is I go into different corporations, different schools, and I work with students and professionals in person on ways to improve their communication and collaboration skills. And that's what we do at Oak and Reeds. And we've worked with a lot of different clients. So this slide, the point of it is basically that these techniques are useful regardless of what industry you're working at. I work with a lot of tech companies. I'm based here in the Bay Area, but also with advertising agencies, with doctors, with engineers, with student athletes I've been working a lot with too. So regardless of what work you're doing, these are techniques that are going to help you deal with change in your job, no matter where you are. So the name of my company is actually called Oak and Reeds, and we focus on taking practical improvisational skills and applying them in a business context. And the name Oak and Reeds is actually, it comes from, and I wonder if anyone here can guess where it comes from, but it actually, I'm not going to give you much time. I'm just going to go right ahead and give away the answer. It's actually the name of an Aesop's fable. Just like the tortoise and the hare or any of those ancient Greek stories, this Aesop's fable has a message. And the short version of this story goes like this. There was a big tall oak tree standing by the side of a river. and the oak tree was talking to these small grasses, these reeds by the river, you know, these grasses. And the oak tree was saying, look at me, I'm so big and strong. I've got this great trunk, these big branches, these deep roots. I'm amazing, I'm this terrific oak tree. And look at you, you're just a bunch of flimsy reeds. Every time there's a breeze, you basically fall over. You know, I can't imagine how you've been strong enough to survive all this time. So of course, overnight, there's a big storm, and the storm has a lot of wind, and the wind rips the oak tree out from its roots, snaps it in half, and kills it instantly. But the reeds survive because they're flexible. Every time there's a big gust of wind, they blow over, and then when it's over, they pop right back up. So I love this message of using flexibility as a way to deal with unexpected storms, unexpected conflict, and really unexpected change in your life. So really the whole foundation of my business is around teaching people how to be more like those reeds. You know, it doesn't matter how strong you are, but if you're not flexible and you're not adaptable, when that storm comes, it's gonna rip you up, it's gonna really mess you up, and you're not gonna be able to rebound. So that's what these tools are really useful for. This is what I love talking about. Let me take a little water. All right, so let's jump in. Today's objectives. First, we want to talk about overcoming the fear of failure. And within any change, there is this underlying fear that what happens if after the change goes through, what if I'm bad? What if I make mistakes? What if I don't know how to operate at a high level in this new working world, or under this new org structure, or with this new boss, or with this new team? You know, there's this fear that I'm going to mess up. I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to look dumb. Maybe I'll even get fired or in trouble. So we're going to talk about how you can adjust your mindset to deal with that fear of failure. The second, and this is a really big one, obviously in improvisation, how do you plan for the unplannable? So how do you react to scenarios or questions or issues or challenges or new people? How do you react to anything that you don't have a plan for? Because let's face it, you don't have a script sitting on your desk at the beginning of each day telling you exactly what you're going to say in every meeting. And this is a skill you're already using, and you're probably already using it a lot. This is part of our job as professionals. So how can we isolate the muscles, and I like to use that as a metaphor, how do we isolate those muscles that we use when we're dealing with the uncertain and dealing with things that we don't have plans for, and how do we work those out so we feel even more confident when new changes come our way? And finally, we're gonna talk about collaboration. So this is another solution to dealing with major change. So how can we work together to create new ideas, new processes, new things that'll help us as teams and as teammates work through change? Because this is what I'll argue, is that there are some techniques from the world of improvisation, and many of you maybe have already heard of this idea of yes and, that we can take each other's ideas, build on them, support them, and then move together to create even better solutions to change. So those are the three objectives for today. And we don't have too much time, so I'm gonna keep on moving. All right, so I always like to say, you know, these are some of my assumptions about the group, and feel free to chime in if you know, there's other things you want to talk about. My assumptions about you as an audience are, you know, you're mostly Chicago alumni. You have all gone through some type of change. So I don't need to explain to you what workplace change is. It's something that you've probably experienced, whether it's a reorg, an acquisition, a change in leadership. There's all sorts of different types of change. So you're going to have specific examples in your own life that you can apply some of these tools and techniques to. Also, you're interested in learning new stuff. You know, otherwise you wouldn't be here taking your lunch hour and learning some new techniques. So hopefully you have some interest in this, and this is what I get excited about too. So my job is to get you interested in what I'm interested in too. And people are coming from all sorts of different places in their career. Some of you may still be in college or grad school or early in your career. Some of you may be VPs, directors, CEOs. Who knows who's on this webinar? So I'm going to try to make sure that these tools and techniques apply to your life, regardless of whether you're in a leadership position or if you're more in a direct report position. So I also want to know if there are new things and questions that you have, or specific questions about any of the things I'm talking about. Rachel's helping me out in the question and answer box. So at any point, fire in a question. I may not be able to answer it right away, but we're gonna have time at the end for Q&A. So feel free, and I would encourage you to ask a lot of questions as I'm going through this workshop today. All right. So again, 3 things we're going to cover today. Fear of failure, yes and also this idea of radical acceptance. So this is actually going to get into, we're going to get into that a little bit later when I talk about some solutions for dealing with change and uncertainty. So let's keep going. The first topic is this idea of overcoming the fear of failure. So I want to actually ask you a question here. This is a feedback poll. So you can go into your GoToWebinar panel here and answer this built-in poll. When was the last time you failed at work? So here, I'm actually gonna, I'm gonna answer it too. So when was the last time you failed at work? And I'm gonna pop that out, give people a chance to answer this. And as the scores come in, it's actually really fun to watch these scores come in. Cool. Okay, so it's looking like, you know, half the people voted so far. The last time most people failed was this week or this month. I do appreciate those of you who failed in the last hour. I know I have. I fail all the time. Some people today. Okay, so it looks like the winner was this month. Pretty much, and the 5% of you who've never failed, congratulations. That is quite an achievement to never have made a mistake at work. So the point is, mistakes are things that happen all the time. And I want people to acknowledge the fact that it's normal. Like, mistakes are going to happen. I'm struggling with this webinar platform. That happens too. That's okay. And the cool thing about mistakes is that they are a great way to learn. What I coach people when I do workshops in person is, if you make those mistakes here in this room today, where we're working through new ideas, working through new techniques, you're not going to make that mistake again. So I actually want to change people's mindset on failure, because failure is really just the beginning of a learning process. And as a way to do that, our first tool today is this idea of a failure bow. So instead of, when you make a mistake, oftentimes people will get nervous, they'll get upset, they'll try to hide it, they'll try to paper over it. I want you to celebrate that failure. And in my workshops, what I actually have people do is we practice anytime you make a mistake, because people will make mistakes all the time in this workshop. I want you to put your hands over your head and yell as loud as you can, "I failed," and then take a big bow. Okay, so I actually want everyone here to do that at your computers right now. If you're at your desk, you don't have to scream that loud, but I really want you to practice. We can all do it together so we all feel awkward all at once here on our webinar. All right, so I'm gonna count us in. Ready? 1, 2, 3. I failed. Yes, take a big bow. So it's silly. I get that. It's a weird, silly thing. And that's part of it, is that failure doesn't have to be the end-all be-all. It can be something that we laugh off. So often we have in our heads this idea that the failure is catastrophic, when oftentimes people around us don't even notice that it happened. So enjoy the fact that a failure is a learning opportunity. And in this idea of a change process, there's going to be mistakes. Mistakes are going to be made. These are new ideas. Whatever the change is going to be new to a lot of different people. Most folks are actually going to be so in their own heads that they're not going to notice you making mistakes, especially early on in a change process. So give yourself the ability to change that mindset and take a little mini failure bow. You know, even if you're not literally doing the whole bow in front of your colleagues, do it mentally. Give yourself a break. It'll really help set the tone that this is not going to be a life or death situation. It's just a change at work. So this fear of failure, I can't stress enough how important it is. We have the ability to choose how we respond. So this idea of internal versus external, understand how you yourself respond to failure. That's going to be different for every single person on this webinar. Understand the things that you do physically. Do your hands start to sweat? Do you get sweaty in your face? Obviously, I get sweaty. That's one of the first things that pop into my head. Do you start to get dry mouth? Your knees shake? You know, what are these physical responses? Acknowledge them. You're not going to be able to destroy them or get rid of them, but you can acknowledge them and just realize this is what happens and move on and change your mindset around them. And finally, this is the first tool. So teach this to your team. You can share this at a team meeting or a weekly check-in, or at the next time you have the ability to change or alter an agenda for a meeting. Give this tool out to your team and see how often you see people around you using the failure bow. It's actually really fun to see, you know, all of a sudden you hear someone at their cubicle, they stand up, they take a big failure bow because they sent an email before they had finished writing it. You know, it's fun. It's a great way to change our attitudes towards failure. All right, let's keep moving. We got plenty to talk about today, so I don't want to harp on that too much. I want to get into our next topic, which is this idea of using this technique of yes and as a way to collaborate to develop new responses to change. So another poll, here's another question. What do you think is workplace change, or any type of career, is workplace change with your team or in your company, is that a team challenge or is that an individual challenge? What do you think? Who does this rest on? Is this something you have to deal with, or is this something you have to do as a team? Give people a little chance to chime in. All right. Yeah, it's looking like, you know, the bulk of people here are saying it is a team challenge, about 78%. You know, I'm not sure there's a right answer here. It obviously depends on the change, but I also think that working in a team context can make the challenge of change a little bit easier if you're able to rely on colleagues and teammates. So I love to introduce this idea of yes and with two of the greatest improvisers and two of the greatest comedians I know. And some of you may know who these people are, Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. And this idea of yes and, to back up a little bit, it's essential to improvisation. Essentially what it is anytime you're on stage with someone else, where you're on your stage with your scene partner, let's say Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, two amazing comedians, they're on stage. If they're improvising, they have to create something out of nothing, right? There's no script, there's not even a set. People don't even know what time period this upcoming scene is supposed to be set in. So every idea, in order to do that, every idea has to be accepted and then built upon. So let's say Tina Fey says, oh my gosh, look at this amazing cruise ship we're about to go on. I can't wait to start our cruise. Amy Poehler has to say, all right, well, I have to acknowledge that this cruise ship is real. We're about to go on a cruise. We're a couple on vacation, let's say. And then she has to add something to that situation to say, like, okay, I'm really excited, honey. I can't wait for us to be able to take the kids next time. So now they're a family. They've got kids. So the whole point of this is, within a scene in improvisation, you take someone's idea, you acknowledge it as valid, and then you add your own idea on top of it. And you keep repeating this process, and you're building a whole set of new ideas that didn't exist at the beginning. And that's this idea of yes and. Now, Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, they're amazing comedians. This is from their hosting of the Golden Globes, which is absolutely hilarious. The way they play off each other is terrific. What you want to look for is, who is your Tina Fey? Who's your Amy Poehler? Who's that person that you can rely on that will build off of your ideas and make you look good? That's really the important part here. So that's this idea of yes and. So I'm going to move past this. I just kind of gave an example, but really quickly, this is the difference between yes and yes but. Yes but is, you know, these two stick figures are saying, oh, where are we going to go on vacation? On the left panel, someone says, oh, let's go to the beach. Yeah, we could go to the beach, but at the beach there are sharks and that's kind of scary, so I think we shouldn't go there. Conversation over. Conversely, let's say someone says, the guy in the red shirt or the girl in the red shirt, these are non-gendered stick figures. Let's say that person says, all right, let's go to the mountains. And the person in blue says, oh yeah, if we go to the mountains, we can go skiing. The conversation can go on from there, right? Maybe they go skiing, maybe they don't, but at least what's happening here is the person in blue is saying, I hear what you're saying about the mountains, and I'm adding this idea that goes along with that, and I'm looking for you to add something on top of that so we can continue this conversation. It's a great way to generate ideas without stopping conversation. So how does that have to do with change? Now, yes and is a great way of thinking about, how do we approach new ideas, new situations, new circumstances? Do I say yes and to it? Do I accept the idea? Or do I block the idea? Do I say no but? And there's this great writer, Robert Poynton, who I would encourage everyone here to buy his book. And he writes about using improvisational techniques in the workplace. And he has this great concept of the costs and value of blocking versus accepting new ideas. So let's look at it. There's this 2x2 matrix. I'm a former consultant, so I love matrices. So let's dive into it. What are the costs and values of either accepting ideas and blocking ideas? So let's look at accepting. What are the benefits of yes-anding and responding to changes and new ideas with this yes-and mindset? Creates flow, right? New ideas will come. It's positive energy. People enjoy and they're engaged in these conversations because they know their ideas are going to be added to. The sense of adventure. You don't know what's going to happen. So that sense of adventure can say, hey, this is a change, but we have the opportunity to write our own story here because it's not pre-written. You know, this new org structure means that we get to define what our team does on a daily basis. That's cool. This is a great mindset you can take. New ideas come about, this idea that you take one idea and another idea, put them together and create a third idea. That third idea didn't exist before. So this is innovation. This is a great way to be innovative in terms of processes. And the last one, which might be the most important, brings others in. So you're seeing other people around you, you're bringing them into the conversation, and they're seeing how their ideas are being included. These are all the values of taking a yes and mindset when you're confronted with change in the workplace. Now, there are costs, right? It's not all cherries and rainbows. And I know that's not a saying, but I can't think of the real one. So there are some costs to using yes and when you're confronted with a change. So it takes some mental effort, right? You have to listen. It's hard. People aren't great listeners. I do a lot of workshops just on listening. And I can tell you, listening takes a lot of mental effort to hear that idea in order to build on it. You're also forced to let go. You don't control where this conversation is going because really it's 50% you, 50% that person across from you. And if you're having this conversation in a team, let's say it's a 10-person team, everyone's ideas are being added to, you're only 1/10 of that. So you, especially if you're a manager, you're giving up a little bit of control in how the team as a group is responding to this change and what direction you choose to go in. You can feel weak, especially if you're used to managing and controlling where things are headed. So it's a way you can sometimes feel a little bit like you're out of control. And the other cost is you're going to go far with this. So you're going to get a lot of ideas, and that may be a little unnerving, especially if you're the decision maker. So again, with yes and, there's always an opportunity to generate ideas and then edit them down afterwards. You don't have to necessarily say, okay, we generated that idea using yes and, that has to be what we spend the next 6 months working on, right? Obviously you can't run a business like that. So again, thinking about the value of using yes and. Now, the other side of this matrix, what are the value and costs of blocking ideas, of saying no to a change, or saying that's not something I want to be a part of, and resisting a workplace change? So what are some of the benefits of that? One, it stops unwelcome adventure and it retains or attains security. These go hand in hand. Feeling secure at work is no small thing. We are always on the verge of a layoff or being let go or having our role changed. And this idea of holding on to things that we know is very important and it's valuable, and that's a real thing. You know, there's so much at work that we can't control. When there is something that we can control, we want to often hold on to that security. So saying no to change and working to block change gives us that security. And that's where a lot of that impetus comes from, to say, no, I don't want to get involved with changing something, or I want to resist this change and fight against it to keep the status quo. What that does, other things that blocking can do is it avoids risk. So if you're saying no to the change, you're probably more likely to know what's going to happen if you keep the status quo. And the other value about no but is it cuts off sidetracking. So this is often a result of using a yes and type of mindset. You kind of get into this rhythm of saying yes, oh, and we could do this. Oh yeah, if we did that, we could do this. Oh, if we did that, we could do this. And then you get up and 5 minutes later, you've brainstormed a solution to, you know, how to water ski when it's cold out, rather than figuring out how to deal with the problem at hand. So the yes and can really go off the rails unless it's brought back in. So that could be an issue. And blocking can also, it creates a little drama. So if that's something you're interested in, like having that conflict essentially is what I mean by that. Like you're saying no, and sometimes that tension or drama can be useful. Again, I wouldn't worry too much about that one. Finally, the fourth one is, what are the benefits, what are the costs of resisting change? So when you block ideas, you take away energy and flow. You stop new ideas from being created. I mean, obviously, it's kind of the opposite of the top left corner. If yes-anding creates flow and adds energy, blocking, saying no but, saps energy and stops flow. People are less likely to want to share ideas because they see their ideas are not being brought into the conversation. They're not being added upon. Maybe they're being shot down. So there's costs there. And it prevents new ideas or big leaps forward, and it excludes others. So essentially what this means is fewer people are having a say in how an organization moves forward or how a group may react to change. So again, to summarize this whole matrix, the point of this is not to say yes and is how you should respond to every single change, because you can't. What you want to do is look for situations where taking a yes and mindset when confronted with change is more valuable, or when keeping that safety and security is actually more important than creating flow or adding energy. Looking for situations where blocking and saying no and resisting a change may actually be more useful for you. But having this matrix lets you see like there are costs and benefits to both approaches. So I really like this summary in that sense. Okay, let's keep going. Question 4, another poll question for you. Can you think of a time when you decided to, sorry, I can't read this. When you decided to embrace a change? Why'd you make that decision? Sorry, when did you decide to block a change? It's tough to read that one. Why did you decide to block that change? What made you make that decision to say no and go on that right side of the matrix to say, I don't want to be part of this? It's interesting here. Yeah. Cool. All right. So I'm glad, this is a question I was curious. This is a new question for me. So I'm glad there's got some different results here. We got almost roughly an even split, 2 winners. Typically, when an idea isn't fully fleshed out, or most important, the biggest winner here was confident that the idea wouldn't work. Those are why you're resisting change. Seems like less folks are interested in the status quo, and there's something else. There's always something else. But if the idea is not going to work, if you're confident the idea isn't going to work, that's probably a reason to block something, and that seems totally reasonable. So I want to give popped out here. I want to give folks a technique that you can use to work on this idea of yes and. It's a way to practice using yes and as a technique for building ideas, because again, we want to have this as a muscle that we're ready to use when confronted with a change, and we have to think of new ways that we're going to respond to it. So this is an exercise I love. You can run this on your own. It takes about 5 minutes. You can do it with your team. It works in partners. So the way it works is this. We're working on this idea of yes and what you say is, I want people to write down their 3 favorite things. So just quickly take 10 seconds, write down the 3 favorite things, first things that pop into your head. For me, I would write down, I love doing improv. That's me doing an improv scene. I think there's some sort of like chopping thing that my scene partner is doing on my back. I love cooking. It's a picture of me cooking. And I love watching the Patriots play football. And usually this doesn't get a lot of love, especially now that they lost the Super Bowl. I'm keeping the GIF in though, because I'm standing with the Patriots. So again, you're writing down your 3 favorite things. And then after you have people write down their 3 favorite things, what you do is have people partner up, share the 3 things on each of their lists, and then give them about 3 or 4 minutes to see if they can combine an item off of each of their lists to create a brand new idea for a business. And it's really fun. So first of all, this is just a fun exercise. It's a great way to get people to work together. It's almost like an icebreaker, kind of team building game. But it also forces people to think of, how can I yes and something off of someone's list with something on my own list to create something brand new. So let's bring this into the workplace change world. You have a group of people all have things that they like doing or things that they are good at in a team context. And let's say a change comes. How can you make sure that these people have the ability to do what they're good at and do it together? And how can they combine ideas or combine techniques or combine skills to create this new team of the future? So what's important about it is you're working off of strengths. People always like dealing with things they like, that are enjoyable, things that they're good at. And if you find ways to combine those strengths, person to person, group to group, you're going to create cool, interesting, useful, new scenarios that will build off of strengths and that will help people collaboratively develop what does that new team structure look like, or what does our new goal set look like, given all these other goals that we have. How can we combine them in new ways? Again, this is on that left side of the matrix. The value and costs of yes-anding, which I would encourage people is generally a more useful way to approach change rather than the resistance of it. Okay, so we're moving quickly here and taking a quick little time check, and we're moving on to our towards the end. And this is a whole other idea. It's this idea of radical acceptance. So what I've talked about so far are some techniques for generating ideas to help you deal with change, how to react to change. This is more on the reaction to change for you as an individual. How can you change your mindset when a change comes through and adopt this idea of radical acceptance? So before we get into the definition, I have our last question here, and I want you to answer, what's the kind of change you're most comfortable making? Do you feel more comfortable when you have to make changes in your personal life, or you feel more comfortable when to change at work? All right, got pretty clear winner here. Wait for this poll to go through so people can see it. So that's a clear winner. That might be our clearest winner so far today. 7-3, personal change is easier than professional change, which is interesting. I'm not sure I feel the same way. I probably would. I voted professional change. I find to be a lot easier because it's sometimes a lot less emotional. But anyway, interesting. Something to think about. So radical acceptance is this idea that is, the reason I asked the question is it's useful both in personal or professional change. And it starts with this idea of, how do we learn new things? And there's this great author, Lois Holzman, who writes about the difference between knowing paradigms, essentially ways that we can approach our understanding of learning. And there's kind of two sides, right? There's acquisition learning, which is this idea that learning is something you acquire, and once you have that skill, you then have it. It's kind of an all or nothing type thing. Versus developmental learning, that we're constantly learning, we're learning by doing, and we're always developing that skill. It's never quite fully fleshed out. We're always changing and altering our skill. Versus acquisition learning is you are working towards a kind of a cutoff, and once you have that skill, you've got it. And what I think is interesting about this is this idea in radical acceptance that you can just try something on. And radical acceptance is just this idea that I'm just going to jump into a situation. I'm going to jump into this new world or this new universe that this workplace change has brought about. We have a new organization. We have a new VP. Whatever that new thing is, I'm going to say, I'm fully into this. And the tool you can do is try to practice radical acceptance in small doses. So you can try on a new emotional state or an approach to something, and it means you don't have to fully commit because you can test it out. Let's say a change is coming 6 months from now. You can show up for work one day and say, okay, let me pretend that this has already happened. What about my day changes? And you get to adopt this idea that I am going to investigate what the new world looks like and what my new day-to-day job would look like, I'm almost like coming from the outside as an investigator, as a reporter, to report on what this world would be like. And then at the end of the day, you can step back and evaluate it critically. And the nice part about it is it's not like this change is going to be inevitable or it's going to 100% be what your work is like for the rest of your life. You're kind of giving yourself the opportunity to jump in and then jump out and then reflect on what worked and what didn't work. So the tool itself is more of a mindset tool. And what's cool about it is you can almost separate yourself from an observer and a doer. And it's also a great tool for reflecting with other people. So again, this is a little bit more amorphous, but it's this idea of trying something on, doing it for a short period of time, and then stepping out back into the status quo and reflecting on the differences there. And it's a really helpful way, if you know a change is coming down the road, to kind of dip your little toe into the pool before you jump in on whatever that day is that, everything changes. All right, so, we've come to actually about the end here, and I am curious. We have a little bit of time here for folks to ask questions, to cover any of the topics that we've covered so far. We've covered a couple of different tools. I have a little bit at the end where I'll wrap things up, but kind of wanted to hand it over to Rachel to see if we had any questions from the question pool.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about how you define failure?
Yeah, how I define failure. Interesting. I would define failure as any time that you are in a situation and there's a goal and you don't reach it. So whether or not that goal is something that is explicitly stated ahead of time, or it's a goal that you have in your head that's kind of bouncing around and maybe a little more amorphous, I think it's any time that you don't reach that goal.
Another question is, you were just talking now about trying something on. Can you give us a little bit more concrete of an example of how we might use that in our own life?
Yeah, so I think trying something on, you can do it in a lot of different ways. So let's say, you're going to try something on, I'm thinking like a personal life example. Let's say you're like moving to a new apartment, right? A really great example that I've like to give people is moving to a new apartment. What's my life going to be like when I have to get up and go to work? Can you practice that commute? What does that commute look like if I were to show up at that apartment, even if you're not even in it yet, and practice getting from there to work? What's that like? What does that feel like? What are the things I pass along the way? It's kind of a small little thing, but what you're doing is just feeling what that day-to-day existence would be like without actually doing it yet. So that when you actually do move into that apartment, you've already done the commute even before you've ever really commuted from there. And you can kind of, it's one less thing that'll be a shocking change when you have to live in that day-to-day environment or live in that day-to-day existence of, I now live in this new neighborhood.
What are some strategies when those who are in management or above you don't recognize the need for change?
So when you are looking for more change, I wish there's more context there. Like when you need to make the case for change, is that kind of what the question would be? So I think, well, anytime you need to make a case at work, like if there's something that's not working, there has to be some evidence behind it. I think you also have to look at that matrix of responding and reacting to change. That's something that whoever is in leadership is also thinking about too. So think about what is pushing them towards the right side and towards the blocking or saying no side of that. And what is the sense of safety or sense of maintaining the status quo that they're clinging to? And why is that? Like, why do they want to say no? And there's probably some reasons there. So if you can answer those questions and try to move them from the the benefits of blocking to seeing more of the benefits of saying yes and, that can kind of help you figure out how to make that case.
Can you give a detailed example of using yes and as an exercise in business development to develop or drive a change in mindset?
Yeah, and so I can give a good business development example. So basically, I use yes and a lot in a sales context. And I think it's really helpful when you're trying to change a mindset. Let's say, not necessarily change a mindset of a customer, because I think that's hard to do, but help them see some value. So you can basically take a yes and mindset when you're trying to work with a client or work with a customer. You have to acknowledge their reality. You have to acknowledge their day-to-day. And that's the yes part, like really hearing what are the challenges that they're working through right now. And a lot of times I think, in sales, we're trying more so to pitch our product rather than to figure out what someone's problems are. Because if you can make it really obvious that your solution is the and to acknowledging their problem, then it's super easy to do business development. I think a lot of times people miss because they don't get what it is that the challenge is right off the bat, and that's a listening problem. So if you're confident in your understanding of your product, you're going to find a lot of different ways that your product is really the idea that you would add on to their challenge to create a brand new idea, like we're talking about with yes and, to create that brand new idea, which is essentially the two of you working together.
Another question is, we spoke of tools to deal with the fear of failure and collaboration, but what tools that you've shared today or additional tools could we use to address planning for the unplannable?
Yeah, so planning for the unplannable, it's this idea, so yes and is one of those. And what it is basically, that's one tool that you can use when you don't necessarily know where you're going to go, but you know that we can build off of each other's ideas. Another idea with planning for the unplannable is to build in some time for, just like we're talking about radical acceptance, building in some time for people to test out change rather than having to jump into it all the time. Because I think a lot of times there's this assumption that when a new idea comes across, we have to fully be into it 100% from day one. And if there's more of a ramp up time, I think that's like a better, more effective way of reacting to that.
But sometimes change is immediate. So you're suggesting we use the yes and strategy. Is there anything else from this presentation we might take to deal with changes that happen quickly?
Yeah, I think without knowing exactly what change it is that's happening right away, having an improviser's mindset takes a couple different forms. One is knowing that mistakes are gifts, and knowing that if you are forced to jump into a situation where you're going to be bad and you're not going to be 100% effective right away, that those mistakes are things that you can learn from. The second is to have your listening skills really, really on to like a 10 out of 10, right? So there's an exercise that I'll do called reflection. So it's like a 2-minute reflection. And the way it works is, one person shares a challenge that they're working on, and they have about 2 minutes to share that challenge. And the other person, their partner, is listening to them. And what they'll do is their job is just to listen to that challenge. Just listen for 2 minutes. And after 2 minutes, their job is to just reflect back or share back as much information as they can about what they just heard, or what that challenge that their partner is going through, what all the details of that challenge are. And what's nice about that is it kind of outsources some of the listening, and it gives you a chance to step back from what you're going through, because you're hearing what you're going through shared through someone else's words. And oftentimes, even without providing any solutions, just having that second set of eyes on what you're going through gives you a little bit of a break, and it gives you the opportunity to step outside of yourself, hear what's going on in your own head, and then from that, you can often get a lot of insights. So I think really within a change situation, if that's happening to you, stopping, periodically and having those reflections with a partner or with a team to say, here's what I am going through right now with this change. You know, you can even do it like something happens to you in the morning, find someone, pull someone aside for 10 minutes in the afternoon, do this reflection exercise and give yourself a little moment to breathe and hear your words through someone else's. And you'll often have a lot of helpful insights just by taking those 5 minutes.
Another question, what other tips can you give us about developing our own improviser's mindset? Are there things we should be reading or watching? What can we do?
Yeah, I think with all of these, practice is the one thing that you get better with all of these, because it's less of a technique that you can just roll out the first time and be great at it. You kind of have to practice adopting a yes and mindset in a meeting and looking for opportunities to build off of other folks' ideas by supporting them verbally and making it clear that this is how you approach collaboration. I think taking improv classes is a really great way. Honestly, you know, it sounds a little self-serving, but you really learn a lot by taking a level 1 improv class about what this feels like when you're doing it in the moment. And I think the previous question was about what do you do on the fly? And I think, or planning for the unplannable. And I think the first thing checks in with what physical responses do you have when you get thrown or when you don't know the answer to something. And that's different for everyone. And taking an improv class actually really helps you understand what you do when you panic, and then figuring out your own strategies for digging yourself out of that panic. The failure bow is one strategy for that, but a lot of them are also just, you know, focus on what the other person is saying, or go back to some of my core skills or techniques, or rely on some pre-planned phrases that I use to get out of these things. Whatever everyone has, it's going to be different, but you kind of have to just practice it a lot and practice throwing yourself into situations where you either, you know, sink or swim.
Yeah, I think that's a really good reminder. And some folks were asking if you know of any improv classes in Chicago other than Second City since you lived here.
Oh yeah, I mean there are tons. You know, I'm not really affiliated with any particular one, so I feel comfortable suggesting, you know, IO has amazing classes. I've taken classes there when I was in Chicago. Sorry, that's in New York. The Annoyance Theater I think is really, really good. So those are two theaters where you're going to get great instruction, and their shows are really funny too. So as a student, you get to go to a lot of shows. And obviously Second City has tons of classes too. And I'd also encourage people to, you know, beyond IO and the Annoyance, look for, you know, theaters that offer you the chance to take a one-night drop-in class, because, you know, it's sometimes you don't want to commit to a full 6-week class, but you want to just try this out and get a feel for how the theater works and who the people are around you. And so you can just go for one night, see what it's like, and kind of hop around, shop around, see which place is more up to your liking.
Great advice. And one of our attendees just said IO is Improv Olympic, so that people know in case that isn't a term they're used to.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. The Olympics, now that they're going on, they actually sued Improv Olympic. And so they're no longer really officially calling themselves Improv Olympic because the Olympics sued them. So yeah, it's kind of a funny, just the timing of the Winter Olympics right now. But yeah, IO used to be called Improv Olympic. Now it's IO. If you call it Improv Olympic, they won't get upset, but same thing.
Great. Can you give us any examples of how you've seen these skills work for people in their workplace?
Oof, yeah. I mean, so how to use these skills to work. So I think an example that works really well is Yes and is an amazing tool for brainstorming and innovation. So beyond change, you know, if we're talking about how we can make it work, you can use Yes and, like that Yes and brainstorm technique I just taught you. You can use that if you have any sort of challenge. So you kind of wall off 5 minutes in a meeting to generate ideas where the only way people can respond is by acknowledging the last idea that was said and then building off of it in some small way. And even in a short time period, and I always coach people whenever they're doing exercises like this to to cut the time shorter than you might think, because it keeps people moving quickly and you don't get fatigue. And also people are more comfortable sharing more outlandish ideas if they know that it's only going to last like 4 minutes. So if you need solutions, that's a great way to do it. You have one person recording all the ideas, and what you're doing is you're forcing people to build off the previous idea rather than just throwing their idea off into the ether and kind of in a random way. And what that does is it essentially keeps the train of thought going. And that's really important. That's building off of the listening skills, and it's building off of the idea generation skills. And I think you'll find it's really valuable anytime you're confronted with a challenge and you need a bunch of ideas very quickly.
Great. You mentioned one book. Can you tell us a little bit more about that author and the title of the book? And are there any other books or resources like that we should be looking at?
Yeah. So Robert Poynton, Poynton, he wrote a book called Everything's an Offer, which I really like. He's a great author on this topic. He's written another book. It's called The Do Book, and you just Google his name and you'll see his books come up. I think those are really good resources. I write a monthly blog post on different techniques for working and using tools from improvisation in your daily work. That's on my website. I just actually released a new one yesterday on this idea of status and power in the workplace and how we can use ideas from the way we play characters in improv and the way we show power on stage as a way to think about how power is shown in the workplace and how we can give and take status to people, and in order to kind of help deal with some of the challenges we're facing right now in 2018, where there's a lot of imbalance in the workplace in terms of status. So that's something I just recently wrote about. I wrote about Yes and last month. I think, between those two things, there's a lot of good books. I'm totally blanking. Kat Koppett, Katkoppett, wrote a great book on applied improvisation and how to use improv in your daily work. I reference her book all the time, so definitely buy her book too if you're interested in this stuff, because she has almost, I want to say 100 different exercises that are useful in different situations. So those are a couple of different resources I think that are really good.
Excellent. And the last question is, what do you wish your younger self knew, if you're giving advice to yourself at the beginning of your career?
Oof, a lot of things. What do I wish my younger self knew? Honestly, I wish I knew the failure bow, to be honest, because I think as a younger employee, I didn't realize how much I didn't know, and that it's some of the mistakes that you make are not as life-threatening as you might think in the moment. And I think that fear of making mistakes often, or I'm saying often, but like in a way early on in my career, I was a little less risky in terms of the path I took, because I thought there had to be like one way to being successful. And I think as a younger person, you have a lot more opportunities to make mistakes, try new work avenues, try new careers than you think, because you're able to rebound, especially if you have the mindset that this is a test. I'm trying new things. If I fail at something or I fail at a particular type of skill, it doesn't mean I'm going to fail for the rest of my life. So I think taking bigger swings early on in your career, when you have presumably less at stake outside of your job, should be something that you should feel confident doing, because it can lead to really amazing opportunities for yourself if you give yourself that opportunity.
Thank you for that, Dave. And I think we're done with our questions. I don't know if you had any final comments for us.
Yeah, no, just to wrap things up, basically we covered a bunch of different tools today. We talked about the failure bow. We talked about the costs of blocking versus accepting changes and ideas. Talked about this tool of yes and, so how to build off of other people's ideas. We talked this idea of trying on a new situation before you have to fully commit to it, to see how your body reacts, to see how your brain reacts, to see how emotionally you react. And my whole point here is you want to start to practice these tools. So you're not going to be able to become an expert if you just listen to a 45-minute webinar. You really need to take a failure bow next time you make a mistake, or really think critically about why I'm blocking a change or accepting a change, and is there a reason why I'm using that technique. Try out yes and next time you need to generate a lot of ideas. So a lot of these things, there's all practical tools, the things you have to practice to get better at. And yeah, that's it. So I just want to thank everyone for coming today. If you have any questions, email me. If you want to read any more content, I have a lot on the website, and hopefully we'll get a chance to work together in the future.
Thank you to everybody who's attended for participating, and a special thank you to Dave Collins for this informative and engaging presentation. And y'all can see his email, so please reach out to him. I just want to quickly share that this month we'll be continuing on this theme of change. We have one more event next week, which is a speed online coaching session where you can have a mini 7-minute coaching session with a career coach on the topic of career change. And I'll be sending out the registration link for that. And you can join us in March for more webinars, sort of a deep dive into a bunch of different topics, journalism, law, business. So join us for all of those. And I hope that we'll see you again on this webinar series. Take care and have a great rest of your day.